I never imagined I'd be sitting here, on my best friend Adam's couch, trying to process the events of the past 48 hours. But here I am, staring blankly at my bank account app, watching the balance plummet to zero. Here's what happened. I've been working since I was 16 every summer, every weekend, all to save up for college. My mom and I set up a joint savings account when I was born, and I've been adding to it religiously. Every paycheck, every birthday check. My mom, 48 years old, was always the co-signer on the account since I was a minor. My dad's not really part of my life anymore. He left when I was 14, living in another state. We talk once in a while, but he's not in the day-to-day picture. But the real blow came 2 days ago. I was preparing to transfer the tuition payment for my upcoming semester when I logged into my account and saw nothing. No pending transactions, just a goose egg in my balance. I thought maybe it was some mistake, so I called the bank. No mistake. The entire $45,000 had been withdrawn 2 weeks ago. I drove straight home, my hands gripping the wheel of my old car, heart racing. When I got in, I found my mom, as usual, browsing Pinterest on her iPad. She didn't even look up when I asked her about the money. "Mom, what happened to my college savings?" She barely glanced at me. "Oh, honey, I've been meaning to tell you. Zara needed it for her wedding. You know how expensive these things are nowadays." I couldn't believe my ears. "You took my money for her wedding?" "This was for my education." "Well, Zara deserves it. She found a good man, and you're just going to college. You can always take out loans, like everyone else, or maybe take a gap year. Work a little more." She scrolled through floral arrangements on her iPad, completely detached. I could feel my head spinning, but I kept my cool. "Does Zara know you used my college fund for her wedding?" "Oh, she knows we're helping," my mom muttered. "Don't make this difficult, Paige. She deserves a nice wedding. You'll figure something out. You always do." I stood there, trying to wrap my mind around what she was saying. My savings, the money I'd worked so hard for, was now funding my sister's luxury wedding. I saw all the receipts, expensive dresses, high-end wedding planners. It was too much. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just walked upstairs, packed my essentials, grabbed my important documents, and walked out the door. She was still on her iPad when I left, oblivious. Now I'm here at Adam's place, feeling like I've been hit by a train. My phone's been blowing up non-stop with messages from my mom, first angry, then apologetic, then desperate. My sister Zara sent me a long text, accusing me of ruining her special day and being selfish. Mom's last voicemail was a mess, just her crying and begging me to come back home. But I haven't responded to any of them. I did send a quick email to my academic advisor, explaining that I might need to delay my enrollment and asking about financial aid. Then I turned off my phone notifications and started looking for a second job. I don't know what's next, but I do know one thing. I'm not going back. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. It's been a few days since I left home, and I've spent most of that time trying to get my head straight. The guilt from walking away from my mom and sister weighs on me, but at the same time, something inside me feels lighter, like a weight has been lifted off my chest. Adam's been a real rock through all of this. He didn't ask any questions when I showed up at his door, suitcase in hand. He just told me I could stay as long as I needed. His mom even dropped by with a big pot of her famous chicken soup. She didn't pry, just handed it to me and said, "We're here if you need to talk, Paige." It was comforting, but also a little surreal. I hadn't realized how bad things had gotten with my family until I saw how much Adam's family cared without me needing to explain anything. But then came the calls, the messages, the endless back and forth. My mom's texts started off with anger, then moved to guilt, and then to bargaining. "Come home," she said. "We'll figure something out together. We're family." Every voicemail, every text, made my skin crawl more than the last one. She was still trying to justify what she did, as if I should just accept that Zara needed the wedding more than I needed my education. And then she sent me a text accusing me of being selfish. She called me immature and said I was making it all about me, when it should be about her special day. Her message was long, full of accusations about how my actions were embarrassing the family. But the worst part? She said she expected me to be her usher at the wedding. Can you believe it? She literally thought I'd just show up and act like nothing happened, as if the entire situation with my college fund never took place. I didn't respond to her either. I couldn't. It was all so messed up, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into going back there acting like everything was fine. That's when I realized something. This wasn't just about the money. This was about finally seeing my family for who they really were, and coming to terms with the fact that I couldn't rely on them anymore. Zara was never going to understand. Mom was never going to admit she was wrong. They were too far gone. I started to make a plan. I wasn't going to just sit here and let everything fall apart. I began looking for a second job. Anything that could help me earn a little extra cash to stay afloat. I found a morning shift at a local coffee shop. It's not ideal, but it's something. Every dollar counts now. The weirdest thing is that I don't feel sorry for myself. I feel empowered. I'm doing this on my own. It feels like I'm finally taking control of my future in a way I never have before. I also opened a new bank account. This time, it's only in my name. No more shared accounts. No more trusting anyone with my future. My mom may have drained my savings, but I wasn't going to let her or anyone mess up my plans again. My dad called me last night. He'd heard what happened from Mom, and for the first time in years, he asked me about my side of the story. He didn't offer money, that wasn't the point, but I could hear the regret in his voice when he said, "I know what she's like, Paige. I should have fought harder when I left. I didn't ask him for help. I told him I was going to make it on my own. This isn't about the money anymore. It's about standing up for myself, and for once, realizing that I deserve better than this toxic family dynamic." I haven't replied to anyone since. The phone's been blowing up nonstop, but I've been ignoring the texts and voicemails. Instead, I've been focusing on moving forward, trying to get my life together. I know it won't be easy, but I'm not looking back anymore. I'm finally doing what's best for me. It's been a couple of weeks since I moved out of my mom's place, and I'm starting to adjust to life without the constant pressure of her manipulations weighing me down. At first, I thought I might crumble under the strain, but something inside me snapped when I walked out the door that night. It's like I realized that staying silent for years, ignoring how my family treated me, had only made things worse. I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. Adam's place has been a safe haven. Every day I wake up, make some coffee, and get to work. I've been juggling 2 jobs now, mornings at the coffee shop and evenings at the electronics store. It's exhausting, but it feels like I'm slowly but surely building something for myself. It's hard, my body aches, and my mind feels foggy some days, but I do it because I know this is what I have to do. I don't have a choice anymore. The first time I went to check my email after all the madness, I had a message from the admissions office at my dream university. I had applied earlier in the year, and when I saw the subject line, my heart stopped. I thought it was going to be some generic rejection letter, maybe something that would confirm I wasn't good enough after all the chaos that had unfolded in my life. But when I opened it, I couldn't believe what I was reading. The letter told me that they had reviewed my application and had decided to offer me a partial scholarship for my first year. Not a full ride, but a significant chunk of my tuition was covered. And it wasn't just the scholarship that got me. The email mentioned my essay, the one I'd written about working 2 jobs throughout high school, saving every penny I could to pay for college. Apparently, the admissions officer had been really impressed with my story. The irony wasn't lost on me. There I was, thinking my entire future had been ripped away by my mother's selfish actions, only to find out that my determination and hard work had been noticed by the one institution I truly wanted to attend. But what really hit me hard was when I remembered the money I had saved. Every single dollar. It was all gone. My mom had taken it, spent it, and told me I was just supposed to figure it out. But now, after everything, I could see that the universe had a different plan for me. This scholarship, even though it wasn't the full ride I had dreamed of, was something. It was my first piece of real hope since I left home. But that wasn't the end of it. Zara continued to send me messages, and they became more and more bizarre. At first, I ignored them, but then she sent me one that really set me off. She was demanding that I be her usher at her wedding. Yes, usher. After everything that had happened, she still thought it was appropriate to expect me to play a role in her perfect day. She said that her wedding was falling apart because of me, and that I needed to stop being selfish and come back home. According to her, I had ruined everything by refusing to support her. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. How could she be so clueless? How could she not understand that it wasn't about the wedding at all? It was about me losing everything I had worked for. But Zara, of course, was too wrapped up in her fairy tale wedding to see that. She still thought of herself as the victim. So I did what I've been doing for the last few weeks. I ignored her. I didn't even bother responding. I knew it wasn't going to change anything. Zara would never understand, and I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to make her see reason. But the real shock came when my dad reached out again. This time, he wasn't calling to ask for details or to offer financial help. He was calling to apologize, which threw me off completely. I didn't expect him to be the one to reach out first, and I definitely didn't expect him to admit that maybe he had made some mistakes when he left. He said, "I always thought I was doing the right thing, Paige, but looking back, I see how much you've had to carry on your own." That conversation, as unexpected as it was, helped me realize something important. My dad may have left, but at least he wasn't blind to how messed up everything was. My mom, though, was different. She was the one who had set all this into motion. And yet, when I heard my dad express his regret, I realized something. I had no desire to go back to that toxic environment. Even if my dad was offering to help me financially or emotionally, I couldn't go back to that. Not after everything that had happened. I had been angry at my dad for years. I had blamed him for leaving, for not being there when I needed him the most. But now, hearing him admit his mistakes, I couldn't hold on to that anger anymore. I was still upset, yes, but I couldn't let it consume me. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. My mom had made her choice. She had decided that my sister's wedding was more important than my education and my future. And that's something I would never forgive. I spent the next few days in quiet contemplation, figuring out what my next move was going to be. I found a small room to rent near my jobs. It wasn't much, a tiny closet with a bed and a small desk, but it was mine. There were no joint leases, no shared spaces with people who thought they had the right to make decisions about my life. It was a fresh start. I signed the lease yesterday. It's official. I'm out. No more depending on anyone. No more pretending that things would magically get better with time. I had to do this on my own, for my own sake. When I came back to Adam's apartment to tell him, I realized something important. He had never once questioned my decision to leave. He didn't pity me or try to offer solutions to fix everything. He just listened and offered me support. He wasn't trying to solve my problems. He was just there for me. That meant more to me than anything. As I sat in my tiny new room that night, looking around at the bare walls, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of peace. I had finally done something for myself. I had taken control of my life. And even though I didn't know what the future held, I knew that I was no longer relying on anyone but myself. I don't know what the next chapter holds. Maybe the scholarship will be enough to get me through school. Maybe I'll need more help along the way. But one thing's for sure, I'm not going to make the same mistake again. I'm done with letting people walk all over me. Done with pretending that everything's fine when it's not. And I'm definitely done with being part of a family that sees me as expendable. So I'll keep moving forward, one step at a time. It won't be easy, but for the first time in my life, I'm ready to face whatever comes next. The days seemed to blur together after I moved into my new place. Every morning I woke up to the sound of my alarm blaring, signaling the start of another long shift. The coffee shop shift was brutal, waking up at 4:30 a.m. to start the day before heading straight to my second job at the electronics store. It was exhausting, but there was something about the routine that felt comforting. I wasn't waiting around for things to change. I was making them happen, one cup of coffee at a time. The exhaustion hit me harder than I expected. Sometimes I'd collapse into bed at night, too tired to even check my phone or think about anything other than getting some sleep. I hadn't been in touch with anyone from my old life, not my mom, not my sister, not even my dad. I was doing my best to ignore the flood of texts and voicemails from them all. They hadn't earned the right to know about my life anymore. If they really cared, they would have thought about that before they decided to steal my future. But one evening while I was cleaning out my inbox, something stood out. It was from my academic advisor at the university. I had applied to my dream school back when everything felt like it was falling apart. The email had the subject line, "Urgent Scholarship Update." At first, I thought it might be just another automated message, something telling me to hurry up with my financial aid application, or a reminder to complete some forms. But when I opened it, I froze. It was from the admissions office, congratulating me. They had reviewed my application and decided to offer me a full scholarship. A full scholarship. My heart skipped a beat. I had to read the email again just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. It was the kind of thing that felt too good to be true. And yet, there it was, in black and white. My dream school wanted me. Not just that, but they were covering the entire cost of tuition. It didn't make sense. How could this be happening? Just a few months ago, I thought everything was over. I had no money, no support, and no idea how I was going to make it. And now, here I was, staring at an email that changed everything. I sat there for a while, letting the weight of it all sink in. I felt like I had won some unspoken battle. The universe had finally given me something back after everything I had lost. This wasn't just a scholarship. This was a chance to start over, to do things on my terms. But the thing that really hit me was the part where the admissions officer had mentioned my essay, the one where I wrote about working all through high school, saving every penny I could to fund my future. Apparently, they were impressed by my determination, and honestly, so was I. I had always worked hard, always tried to make the best out of everything, even when it felt like the odds were stacked against me. But seeing my efforts recognized like this was a reminder that what I had done had meaning. Maybe my story was worth something after all. Maybe my sacrifices hadn't been in vain. As I let the excitement of the moment settle in, I realized something. This wasn't just a scholarship, it was my ticket to freedom. But the freedom came with its own challenges. My mom kept calling, over and over again. At first, it was the usual guilt trip. You're making a huge mistake, Paige. You don't know what you're doing. This isn't how a family behaves. The voicemails were all the same. At first, she sounded angry, then sad, then just desperate. But the last message I got from her, it was different. She didn't even try to justify what she had done with my savings. Instead, she cried, asking me to come home. I sat there listening to the message, her sobs echoing in the silence of my tiny room, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just an emptiness. How could she not see how wrong she was? How could she not understand the depth of the betrayal? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. What was there to say? She had stolen my future and thrown it away for a wedding. There was no fixing that. There was no going back. But Zara wasn't done yet either. Her messages became more personal, more demanding. The latest one was a long, passive-aggressive rant, accusing me of ruining her wedding. She told me I was selfish for not supporting her big day, that my problems weren't as important as her perfect wedding. What really pissed me off, though, was the part where she asked me to be her usher. She was still trying to control me, still trying to pull me back into her world of selfishness and entitlement. I couldn't believe it. After everything she and Mom had done, she still expected me to play a part in her day? To walk down the aisle like nothing had happened, as if I could just forget the past few weeks. I wasn't going to be her usher. I wasn't going to play her game anymore. Instead, I made my own plan. I didn't need her. I didn't need Mom. I was going to move forward with my life, and I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their drama. I didn't respond to Zara's message, but I saved it. I saved everything, just in case. The wedding was in a few weeks, and it was clear to me now. I had to go. I wasn't going for any reason other than to make one final statement. I needed to show them both, once and for all, that I was done with their nonsense, and I was going to do it in the way I knew best, through truth. The day of the wedding came, and I suited up in the best outfit I could afford. A nice black suit, nothing fancy, but polished enough to look good. I knew that Zara was expecting me to show up and be the good little sibling she could parade around. Someone to put on a smile and pretend that everything was okay. But that wasn't going to happen. I walked into the reception, trying my best to act normal, even though everything inside me was screaming. I smiled for the cameras, made small talk with a few people, and kept my distance from Mom and Zara. I didn't want to be involved in their chaos anymore. I was here for one reason only, and I was going to make it count. Then the moment came. It was time for my speech. Usually the usher just says a few words of congratulations and appreciation, but I wasn't going to let this go down the usual way. I grabbed the microphone and looked around the room. People were waiting for the usual pleasantries, the kind of speech everyone expected. But instead, I started with something personal. This is my first paycheck, I said, holding up a photo from my high school graduation. I worked every summer, every weekend, and saved every penny I could to pay for my college. This was all I had. The room fell quiet. I clicked to the next slide in my PowerPoint presentation, showing screenshots of every deposit I had made into my college fund over the years. $45. Oh, my entire future. And this, I said, showing a picture of Zara's extravagant wedding invitations, was where all that money went. I don't think this was my choice, Was it, Mom? I saw my mom's face go pale. Zara's eyes widened, but she couldn't say a word. The room was still. I just wanted to thank you, Mom, I continued, clicking to the final slide. You taught me something valuable. The only person I can rely on is myself. So, thanks for that. The silence was deafening. Zara's mascara started running as she tried to hold back tears, and Lane looked like he was about to pass out. I could see the looks from Lane's family. They were uncomfortable, but this wasn't my problem anymore. I wrapped up my speech with a simple line. You can't put a price on family, right? Well, I've learned that lesson the hard way. And with that, I walked out. The aftermath was chaotic, as expected. Zara screamed at me, calling me all kinds of names, but I didn't care. I had done what I needed to do. I had told the truth. The rest was up to them. I drove home, and for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. I had made my stand. I had done what I needed to do to set myself free, and it felt damn good. It's been a few months since that night, the night I stood up in front of my entire family, exposed the truth, and walked out. Looking back now, I still can't believe how quickly everything unraveled after that. The aftermath was nothing like I expected. The fallout, even worse. But in the end, I came out stronger, more sure of who I am and what I want from life. Right after the wedding, I didn't hear from anyone for a few days. That silence was almost deafening. I was expecting a full-on storm, but instead, everything went strangely quiet. At first, I thought maybe they'd finally understood. Maybe they'd finally seen the light. But that wasn't the case. No, what happened next was something I could never have predicted. It started with Zara. She posted a black square on her Instagram, something about toxic family members and rising above negativity. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw it, though it stung a little. Here was my sister, who had spent months planning her perfect wedding, spending my college fund, calling me the villain for exposing her actions. The irony was enough to make my head spin. Then, the texts started rolling in, from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. The aunts, cousins, distant relatives, everyone suddenly had something to say. You're breaking your mother's heart. Family sticks together. Zara only gets married once. You should have been there for her. My phone buzzed constantly, but I didn't answer. I'd already heard everything they had to say when I was growing up. Every time I was expected to sacrifice for someone else's happiness, while mine was brushed aside, it wasn't happening again. I wasn't going back into that cycle. Not for anyone. Not even if it meant losing them all. There was one person who stood by me through it all, though. Dad. He called me the day after the wedding, laughing so hard I thought he might pass out. You've got a hell of a way to make a statement, kid, he said. I don't think I could have done it any better myself. I hadn't heard him sound so relieved in years. And then something shifted in me. We talked for hours about everything, his regrets, what happened when he left, and how he wished he'd fought harder. I didn't hold anything against him anymore. He was never perfect, but at least he wasn't delusional like Mom. I'm proud of you, Paige, he told me, his voice softer now. You're doing what I should have done years ago, taking control of your life. That phone call was a turning point for me. I didn't need to blame anyone anymore. I didn't need to wait for anyone to come to their senses. I was already on my way to something better. Meanwhile, the drama with Zara didn't let up. She sent me a novel-length text demanding that I make things right. She was trying to guilt-trip me into apologizing for ruining everything. But when I saw her Instagram post about her entrepreneurial journey selling press-on nails, I couldn't help but feel a little smug. Zara had always thought she was entitled to whatever she wanted, even if it meant hurting me. But now, she was selling nails on Etsy and living in the basement of Mom's house. It wasn't my problem anymore. But the most shocking part came from Lane's side. A few days after the wedding, I heard from some mutual friends that his family was reconsidering the marriage. Apparently, after they saw how financially irresponsible Zara was, with her maxed out credit cards, her delusional spending, and the insane wedding expenses, they were second-guessing their decision to accept her into their family. I couldn't say I was surprised. After all, the wedding was nothing more than a show for Zara and my mom, while I was left to pay the price. But hearing that Lane's family might be backing out was the first bit of karmic justice that I could actually appreciate. It wasn't just me who saw the truth. Things calmed down a little after that. I stayed focused on what mattered. I got a second part-time job at a local bookstore, something less exhausting than the coffee shop, and started saving what little I could. I made the dean's list last semester, which felt like a huge win. considering everything I had been through. I even landed an amazing internship for the summer. My resume, built on years of hard work and sacrifice, was starting to pay off. Still, there were moments when the loneliness crept in. I had made a clean break from my family, and though I didn't regret it, I sometimes wondered if things could have been different. But every time that doubt crept in, I'd remind myself of the lesson I'd learned the hard way. I couldn't rely on anyone but myself. Then, out of nowhere, Mom sent me a message. I hadn't heard from her in a few weeks, but I could tell it was coming. She'd been quiet, posting on Facebook about how families should stick together, about how life is too short to hold grudges. I didn't even open the message. I didn't need to. She was still trying to manipulate me, trying to convince me to come back, but I had already moved on. Zara's latest post was the final straw. It was a picture of her in some overpriced boutique dress, her smile wide and fake as she flaunted it on Instagram. New beginnings, she captioned it, tagging a dozen random hashtags about self-love and resilience. The hypocrisy was staggering, but the best part? I found out that she had been hit with a lawsuit. Lane's family had decided to sue her for the wedding costs. Apparently, Zara's reckless spending along with her inability to live within her means had caused a serious rift between them. They had maxed out multiple credit cards just to fund the wedding, and now they were paying the price. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. All that money, all that effort, for what? For a wedding that didn't even last a month. Zara was now facing the consequences of her choices, and there was nothing I had to do to make it happen. Life had a way of catching up with people who refused to change. And then, one morning, I got a letter from Lane's mom. It was unexpected, to say the least. She apologized for what had happened at the wedding, for the chaos that had followed, and even enclosed a check for $45,000. I was stunned. Apparently, after all the drama, Lane's family had realized that what had happened wasn't a reflection of their values. Lane's mom wrote in the note, "We're sorry for what you went through, Paige. This money was never part of our family's values. We hope it helps you continue your education." I didn't know what to do with it at first, but after talking to my dad, I realized what was right. I sent the check to my university, requesting that it be placed in the scholarship fund for students who work their way through school. It felt like the right thing to do. Dad called me again when I told him. He was quiet for a moment. "You're a better person than I was at your age," he said. "I would have just taken the money and run, but I wasn't interested in running anymore. I had already taken what I needed from the situation, the lesson about who I could trust, and the strength to keep moving forward on my own terms. The rest was just noise." As for Mom and Zara, well, things have only gotten worse for them. Mom's house is up for sale, and Zara's Etsy shop hasn't taken off the way she expected. I still get the occasional message from them, but I've blocked them all. I'm not going back. I've moved on, and this time, it's for good. I'm finally focusing on my future, and that, after everything, feels like the real victory. Story 2. Growing up in a small town with my grandparents, parents, and my younger sister, Linda, life was far from easy. Linda, 7 years younger than me, was the golden child. It wasn't subtle, her opinions were always valued more, and everyone showered her with attention. I, on the other hand, felt like I was always in the shadows. It wasn't just the general treatment, it was the blatant favoritism. For example, on Linda's birthdays, she got lavish gifts, things like bikes and gadgets, while my own birthday, which fell close to Christmas, was treated like an afterthought. I got practical things, like books I had no interest in. When Linda took up soccer, our parents couldn't get enough of it. Every game, every practice, they were there, cheering her on. Me? I played my final tennis match in middle school, and they couldn't even make it. They were too busy with Linda's activities. This pattern of disparity continued through my childhood, making me feel invisible. Even as I excelled in school, my parents hardly acknowledged it. It wasn't until Linda took up academics and sports that they started to take note of her. I could feel the jealousy inside me growing with each passing day, but there was nothing I could do. I was just the background. Despite the favoritism, Linda wasn't blind to it. She'd often defend me when our parents compared us. "Monica is good at studying. She can do anything," she'd say. Even after my last tennis match, where I didn't have a crowd cheering for me, she handed me a bouquet of flowers she had picked herself. "Good job," she whispered in my ear. And that small moment was enough to keep me going for a while. Our grandparents tried to intervene. They saw the unfairness and spoke up, reprimanding our parents. But when my grandmother passed away, and then my grandfather soon after. The last bit of protection from my parents' criticism disappeared. Linda stood by me for a while longer, but soon enough, she became their new target. If you're always going to side with your sister, you might as well stand outside too, my mother would say, sneering at Linda for trying to support me. It was during these times that Linda and I began to drift apart. Our parents continued to praise her achievements, and she continued to excel, becoming the perfect daughter. Meanwhile, I was left to navigate the harshness of our home life alone. It didn't help that, after my grandparents passed, our family finances started to suffer. We were told there was no money for me to go to college. My dream of studying design at university was crushed. I ended up working at a small design company, far from home, starting as an office assistant. I wasn't about to let this setback stop me, so I threw myself into my work. I spent my weekends learning new skills, taking online courses, and honing my craft. 3 years later, I was promoted to the design team. 5 years after that, I had become a full-fledged web designer, leading projects and making a name for myself. But I rarely returned home. Every visit felt like a reminder of my failure in my parents' eyes. Then, out of nowhere, I received the news that Linda had been accepted into a prestigious medical school in the city. It felt like a slap in the face, but despite everything, I was proud of her. Linda, congratulations! You've worked so hard, and I admire your dedication, I told her. She thanked me, her voice tinged with embarrassment. But soon, she voiced a concern. The school had suggested a donation, which wasn't mandatory, but our parents were worried about what others would think if we didn't contribute. It didn't take long for Linda to ask me directly for the money. I'm planning to cover my living expenses with part-time work, but this donation, our parents can't help. The way she phrased it made it clear they had pushed her to ask me. I was stunned, but as much as I resented their behavior, I couldn't say no. I agreed to help her out, covering the donation and the entrance fees. She moved into an apartment near the campus, and I thought I could be there for her, offering support when she needed it. But things quickly changed. As Linda immersed herself in university life, her responses to me grew more curt. She'd text me about things she wanted me to buy for her, and I would do it without hesitation. Every time we met for a meal, she seemed distant, glued to her phone. I tried to engage with her, but she would just brush me off. Her attitude made no sense to me. One evening, I tried to lighten the mood during dinner. Mom and Dad probably only care about you, though, I said, smiling. But Linda suddenly looked at me coldly, her expression hardening. Of course, a medical student like me and a high school graduate designer like you, there's no comparison. No one cares about a job that doesn't even need qualifications, she said, her words cutting me deep. I tried to defend myself, explaining that being a designer wasn't easy and that I was working hard every day. But she dismissed me, her eyes filled with disdain. Being a designer is just a title. Anyone can make a website with a simple search online. You'd probably be better off getting a real qualification, she added, rolling her eyes. I froze, stunned by her words. She went on, Dad and Mom are right. They say you're a disappointment. You couldn't even go to college. I'm only here because they told me to watch over you and make sure you don't fall any lower. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. The comparisons I had lived with my whole life flashed before my eyes. Linda had always been the smart one, the capable one, and I had always been the failure. I didn't know how to respond, so I lowered my head, feeling as if I couldn't breathe. Linda took my silence as a sign of weakness, misunderstanding my shock for tears. I'm going home now, she said coldly, and left the table. It was clear now, Linda had become just like our parents. The praise and admiration they had lavished upon her had molded her into someone who saw herself as above me. She had absorbed all of their judgments. I could no longer pretend that I didn't care. I had spent so many years trying to prove my worth, but it seemed that, in the eyes of my family, I was always going to be less than Linda. The holiday season that year solidified something inside me. I was done trying to earn their love. I had to move on. That winter, when I returned home for the holidays, I knew things would be different. Our parents had asked me to come back with Linda, who hadn't visited since she started university. When we walked through the door, it was immediately clear who the center of attention was. The table was overflowing with food, steak, pizza, all sorts of treats as if to celebrate Linda's return. Relatives, neighbors, and even old classmates gathered for a grand party, all eyes on her. I could feel the shift in the air, like everyone was there to hear her talk about her life at university. Linda was in her element. She basked in the attention, boasting about how difficult her life was at the country's most prestigious medical school. "Mom keeps asking me to come home more often," she said, exaggerating her exhaustion. "But you know how tough it is. I can't just leave my team projects or relax at home. People are always contacting me. It's exhausting." I could hear her words but chose to busy myself in the kitchen, away from the spotlight. I didn't want to be part of the performance, but still, I couldn't escape it. As she spoke, I could hear the way her words irritated the neighbors and old classmates, though they kept quiet about it. She was so absorbed in her own world, so proud of herself, that she didn't even notice. Then, as I brought out a tray of wine, an elderly neighbor tried to redirect the conversation, asking about my work. "Monica, aren't you working in design?" she asked. Before I could answer, Linda cut in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You can't really say much about her. She's trying, but she didn't even go to college," she said bluntly, and my mother didn't hesitate to back her up. "She's such a disappointment." The room fell into a thick, uncomfortable silence. I could see the discomfort in the faces of the neighbors, many of whom had never attended college, but had worked hard to raise families. They didn't say anything, but I could tell they understood. Only my parents and Linda seemed oblivious to it all. The embarrassment burned inside me, but I stayed silent. I tried to slip away, but Linda wasn't done. "You still come home a lot, don't you, Monica?" she asked, laughing. "I guess you don't think about anything. Maybe that's why you're so bold." My parents joined in, laughing, as if it was all a joke. "If you say that much, Linda, it'll hurt her feelings," my father mocked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I had enough. My anger surged, and I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "It's better if I don't come back next year," I said through gritted teeth. The words hit the room like a cold breeze. The relatives and neighbors looked at me, concerned, but I didn't care. I grabbed my coat, my bag, and turned to leave. Linda smirked, not even bothering to look up. "I understand. Don't bother coming back again," she said, waving dismissively. My parents echoed her sentiment, their indifference cutting deeper than any words could. I stepped out into the cold night, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and sorrow. It wasn't just the sting of being humiliated in front of family and friends. It was the realization that, after all these years, I had finally reached my limit. I didn't look back as I made my way to the station. The storm inside me was hard to suppress, but I knew I couldn't stay. I had to leave, for my own sanity. Returning home always left me with a heavy heart. For years, I had used my studies as an excuse to distance myself from my parents. But now, as my career advanced, it became harder to cut ties. That sense of familial obligation lingered, but so did the weight of all the disappointment. I tried to convince myself that our parents had done their best, that they raised us the best way they knew how. But it didn't change the fact that, for years, they had put Linda on a pedestal while tearing me down. I had always hoped that Linda would eventually see the injustice. But that holiday, her behavior made it clear she had fully embraced the role our parents had given her. She had absorbed their praises, their expectations, and now she saw me as beneath her. I couldn't be part of that world anymore. If I wanted to respect myself, I had to cut ties with all of them. That decision wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. I knew I couldn't keep pretending that I didn't care, that I wasn't hurt by their treatment of me. The very next day, I started to make plans to move forward. I cut all communication with my family, and though it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done, I felt a strange sense of freedom too. Months passed after that decision, and I threw myself into my work, focusing on building my career. I became even more invested in my job, taking on new projects and working harder than I ever had before. And just when I thought my life couldn't get more complicated, I got an unexpected call from Linda. At first, I ignored it, but she was persistent. She left a slew of messages, urging me to pick up. I finally answered, my heart racing with a mix of dread and disbelief. "Did you pay my tuition?" Linda's voice came through, urgent, almost demanding. I sighed deeply. "I paid the donation and the entrance fee before you enrolled. What's this about tuition?" She quickly explained that the university was asking for the payment, and that she was in trouble if she didn't pay soon. I was stunned. I'd already drained my savings to cover her first-year expenses, including the donation and tuition. She didn't even seem to realize how much I had sacrificed to get her started at university. But now, she expected me to do it all over again. I don't know anything about that, I said, keeping my voice steady. I can't help you this time, Linda. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, I could hear the discomfort in her voice. But, Monica, I really need the money. Her words felt like a punch to the gut, but I stood firm. I had no more to give. Not emotionally and not financially. After our conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Linda's voice echoed in my head, not because of how she asked for the money, but because of what it represented. All those years of playing the dutiful daughter, all those years of supporting her, only for her to treat me like a stranger, like someone she could take advantage of, just because I was the one who had the means to help. I had already covered her first-year tuition, the entrance fees, and the donation that she needed to get into medical school. That was supposed to be it. I'd already stretched my savings, sacrificing my own financial stability to help her achieve her dreams. But now, she was calling me again, asking for more, expecting me to dig deeper into my pocket because she hadn't learned how to manage her own life. It was clear my family had always seen me as the fallback, the one they could turn to when things got tough. But that was over now. I refused to give in. My decision was final. I wasn't going to help her anymore. And as much as it hurt to say that, I knew it was the only way I could protect myself. A few days later, my parents called. They didn't even bother with pleasantries, just went straight into the demand. Monica, we need you to pay for Linda's tuition. She's going to be expelled if you don't. The urgency in their voices didn't faze me. They'd already spent years treating me like a lesser member of the family, so why should I keep sacrificing for them now? The irony wasn't lost on me. They had put Linda on a pedestal for so long. They had convinced her that I was just a means to an end. Their tone was accusatory, but I held my ground. I've already paid for her first year. If she can't manage the rest, that's not my responsibility. They didn't take kindly to my refusal. I could hear their frustration in the way they spoke. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't help, why I wouldn't just do the right thing like I always had. But that's the problem, isn't it? I had always been the one who had to do the right thing. I had always been the one to clean up their messes, pick up the slack, and bear the weight of their expectations. But not anymore. Linda started calling almost every day. Her messages were full of pleas, trying to guilt me into helping her. Please, Monica, if you don't pay, I'll be expelled. Don't you care about me? Don't you want me to succeed? It was the same old manipulation. She wasn't asking because she needed help. She was asking because she felt entitled to it. She thought I owed her, but I didn't. I had already given everything I could. One day, she even left a message that was almost laughable. If you're upset because they told you not to come home, I can try to talk to Mom and Dad, she wrote. That was the final straw. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to play me, trying to pit me against them so I would soften. But I was done being manipulated. I saved the message in a separate file, then deleted everything else. I blocked her number. I couldn't keep subjecting myself to this abuse. Months went by without a word from them. Then, a relative reached out to me with some news. Linda had managed to secure a scholarship and student loans to cover her second-year tuition. But without financial support for living expenses, she was forced to take on part-time work. It didn't take long before she was overwhelmed. Balancing work and school became too much, and she ended up failing several courses. Eventually, she dropped out. It wasn't a surprise to me. Linda had never understood the realities of life. She had always been sheltered by our parents' expectations and their constant praise. She thought she could glide through life on the strength of her intelligence alone. But real life doesn't work like that. It demands hard work, sacrifice, and the ability to take responsibility for your actions. And when Linda couldn't manage that, she retreated. She returned to live with our parents, who, by then, were in financial trouble, but there was no money left to help her. She didn't seek work locally either. Instead, she spent her days playing video games, isolating herself from reality. The family dynamics shifted quickly after that. My parents, once so proud of Linda, now seemed powerless. The man who had once been a respected figure in our town, my father, found himself in scandal when he was accused of groping a woman on a train. Though the case was settled without charges, the damage to his reputation was irreversible. He resigned from his job in disgrace. My mother, who had always struggled to find stable work, could no longer support the family. She disappeared entirely, leaving them to fend for themselves. Linda, My parents, everyone had taken me for granted. They had used me until they couldn't anymore. And now, when everything was falling apart, they were left with no one to turn to. No one but each other. I continued to build my career. After years of working tirelessly, I was invited to join a major project that would make my name known in the industry. My hard work had paid off. I had become a respected professional, and the world was finally recognizing my potential. With the project wrapping up and my savings secure, I decided to pursue a long-held dream of mine, studying business management at university. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of excitement for the future. I was no longer bogged down by the weight of my family's expectations. I was free to pursue my own goals, to build my own life. And this time, no one could take that away from me. I had learned the hardest lesson of all. Family doesn't always mean support. Sometimes it's just a chain that holds you down. And now that I had broken free, I was determined to never let it bind me again.